Story 1. Tao Huabi was the eighth daughter born to a poor family in rural post-war China who was never taught to read or write. As a teenager, she survived the worst famine in human history partially by foraging for wild plants. After the death of her husband some years later, she opened a small food stall to support her children. It was at this stall that she first started selling noodles with her homemade chili crisp sauce. By 1989, she was able to open a restaurant where she quickly earned the nickname Gonma or Godmother because she frequently gave discounts and extra food to impoverished schoolchildren. Her spicy noodles rapidly grew in popularity, and before long, people were coming just to buy the chili crisp on its own. When construction of a new highway started in the early 1990s, she began giving out samples to truckers to promote it by word of mouth, which further boosted its popularity. By 1997, she established her own factory to mass-produce the condiment. Today, the Lao Gan Ma, or Old Godmother, brand produces 1.3 million bottles of chili crisp per day and is sold in 30 countries alongside numerous knockoff imitations. Tao Huabi, whose face adorns every bottle, is currently estimated to be worth $1.05 billion and serves on China's national legislature. Story 2. Sarah Breedlove was born in 1867 in Louisiana. Her parents and all her older siblings were born into slavery. Orphaned at age 7, she was employed as a child domestic servant by age 12. To earn extra money, she began selling hair products geared toward Black women. She eventually developed her own line of hair care products that were sold door to door and demonstrated to groups of women decades before the Avon Lady marketing model was developed from her model. When she retired, she had a sales staff of 20,000, her own factory in Indianapolis, and her Madam CJ. Walker hair products were sold nationwide and throughout the Caribbean. She was the first African-American woman millionaire, creating an estate that in today's money would be worth over $30 million. Story 3. Stephen King. Dad left his mother when he was 2. She worked a series of odd jobs to provide for him and his brother. He worked various odd jobs to pay his way through college and published short stories occasionally. He lived in a trailer with his wife and kids and had just gotten his phone disconnected because they could not afford it when he received the news that his first novel was being published. He received the good news via telegram. Now he is one of the most popular authors in the world. Story 4. Robert Smalls was born a slave. He stole a Confederate Navy ship and sailed to freedom. He fought against the Confederacy and, after the war, became a congressman from South Carolina and a successful businessman. He bought his former owner's mansion from the United States government after they repossessed it. Story 5. Roman Emperor Diocletian came from a poor family, possibly former slaves, in Illyria. He rose through the military ranks and eventually became emperor after 4 emperors were murdered by their own troops in quick succession. Diocletian ruled for 20 years and actually retired. The empire immediately went into civil war, but he lived the rest of his life peacefully. Zhu Yuanzhang was emperor of China and founder of the Ming dynasty. He was an orphan during the chaotic collapse of the Yuan dynasty and begged for alms. He eventually joined a rebel group, rose to leadership, conquered Nanjing, and emerged victorious in the power struggle. Story 6. The founder of the Ming dynasty was Zhu Yuanzhang. He was known as the Beggar Emperor. His parents and siblings died in a famine. He was then accepted into a temple where he begged for alms as a monk and learned to read and write. Traveling as a monk made it clear to him what was wrong with the country. He subsequently joined a rebellion, worked his way to the top, and united the whole of China, founding the Ming dynasty. Story 7. Of the ones I have heard of, probably John Paul DeJoria. Very poor. He founded Paul Mitchell Hair Products and then bought the Patron tequila brand when it was small. 2 completely unrelated successes, both worth billions. Story 8. Ray Charles. His mother washed clothes. His brother drowned. He went blind, developed post-traumatic stress disorder, and became Ray Charles. Story 9. The British Broadcasting Corporation has a podcast called Good Bad Billionaire. They talk about how billionaires grew up, earned their first million, then billion. They also discuss their philanthropy or misdeeds. It is a really interesting and casual listen. Highly recommend. Story 10. Lonnie Johnson is the inventor of the Super Soaker water gun. Maybe not the greatest rags to riches story, but this man is impressive nevertheless. The greatest would have to be John D. Rockefeller. Story 11. Stallone. He was so desperate for parts, he had a minor role in a pornographic film. At his brokest, he sold his dog, his best friend, for $25. He spent his last money to watch a boxing match and got inspired to write Rocky. Studios loved it and, if I recall correctly, offered him about $250,000 for the script as long as he did not star in it. But he rejected their offer because he believed in himself, and eventually the studio gave him a low offer and let him star in it. Story 12. Jim Carrey lived in a van with his family and wrote himself a $10 million check for acting services long before he became famous. He actually cashed it years later for the movie Dumb and Dumber. Story 13. Giannis Antetokounmpo has a unique story. He is the child of refugees, born and raised in Greece. The government initially refused to acknowledge him and provide a passport, resulting in years of struggle against a discriminatory system. His parents were poor, and there were days they had no food. He and his brothers had to share basketball shoes to practice. As teenagers, they all sold items on the street. His coach and teammates on an amateur team helped him significantly during his youth. They provided shoes and food. Eventually, he was drafted into the National Basketball Association. Story 14. Qing Shi was a female Chinese pirate in the 18th and 19th centuries, whose life reads like a remarkable romance novel. She was born poor and ended up working in a brothel, where she caught the eye of a pirate captain who, according to legend, attacked the brothel specifically to liberate her. They married, and she sailed by his side for years until his death. At that point, she gained control of his modest pirate alliance and proceeded to dominate. She built one of the largest pirate fleets ever, with hundreds of ships and thousands of sailors, so large that it was able to fight the Imperial Chinese Navy to a standstill. Ultimately, the Chinese government had to offer pardons to her and the vast majority of her crews for them to agree to stand down. They were even allowed to keep their loot. She then retired to run a casino and brothel, living off her accumulated wealth, and died sometime in her late 60s. To this day, she is widely considered the most successful pirate in history. Story 15. Andrew Carnegie was an immigrant whose father's business struggled. He got a job at the mill when he was 12 years old and eventually became one of the richest men in America. Story 16. Martha Stewart grew up very poor, and her family ate from a backyard garden in New Jersey. She became a billionaire, faced setbacks, and kept getting back up. Story 17. Victoria Woodhull became wealthy as a traveling magnetic healer, joined the spiritual movement, lost all her money, then became a stockbroker on Wall Street and became wealthy again. She was a leader of the women's suffrage movement, the first woman to own a brokerage firm on Wall Street, and was a United States presidential candidate in 1872. Story 18. Jack Ma's parents were not wealthy. His mother was a factory worker, and his father was an artist. Jack struggled academically and failed his college entrance exams multiple times. He is now one of the richest people and founded Alibaba, one of the most prominent e-commerce and cloud service providers. Story 19. Francis Ngannou was born in extreme poverty in Cameroon. He was homeless, an illegal immigrant, went to jail, took up mixed martial arts, and became the Ultimate Fighting Championship world champion. His net worth is unknown, but he has likely been paid multiple millions for boxing matches against Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. Story 20. She did not come from absolute poverty, but Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx, essentially spent a decade trying to convince people to believe in her product. When she finally did, Spanx exploded. She refused to take outside investment and built the whole business on high-risk loans and one single mill owner in North Carolina who agreed to take a chance on her product. At 41, she finally took on investment from a private equity firm and became the youngest self-made female billionaire ever. She celebrated by giving every one of her employees $10,000 and 2 free plane tickets anywhere on Earth. Story 21. There are many examples like this. Andrew Carnegie started as a penniless Scottish immigrant. When he died, he was worth 2% of the United States gross domestic product. Story 22. David Tran, the founder of Hui Fam Foods, the maker of sriracha sauce, has a very inspiring story. Story 23. Julio Cesar Chavez Sr., widely believed to be the greatest Mexican boxer of all time and recognized among the greatest boxers in history, grew up in an abandoned train car along with 9 of his siblings. He started boxing at age 16, fought relentlessly for the first few years of his professional career, and eventually became recognized for his exciting, pressure-heavy style. Once he started appearing on primetime television, his fights became cultural events in Mexico. This allowed him to establish generational wealth for his family. Some estimates say that he is worth around $10 million nowadays. Story 24. Recently, I would say Gordon Ramsay. Born in Scotland to a nurse and an alcoholic father, he went from being basically homeless to what he is now. Story 25. Timothy Dexter. Salmonella has a great video on him. Story 26. I don't know about super wealthy, but I knew a man who decided to turn his life around, got out of jail, bought a ladder and some tools, and did handyman work, mostly fixing people's air conditioners. He got good at it, enough that he and his fiancée started an air conditioning repair and installation company. They became one of the biggest companies of that kind in the city by the time they retired. Normally, I criticize rags to riches stories because there is usually a part where some unfair advantage is glossed over. For them, they became friends with the owner of their biggest competitor and bought him out when he decided to go on a religious pilgrimage. Everything before that was just hard work, hiring good people, and getting the most out of their employees by treating them fairly and paying them well. Story 27. Timothy Dexter. Born to poor parents in colonial United States of America, he married a wealthy widow. Dexter gained notoriety for his peculiar business ventures, often initiated based on bad advice or seemingly random ideas. He shipped coal to Newcastle during a miners' strike, which resulted in a profitable sale. He shipped warming pans to the West Indies, which were then used for scooping molasses. He shipped wool mittens to Siberia and whalebone to the South Sea Islands. It all started after marrying a wealthy widow with buying up continental currency, which later became valuable. He bought it for 1 cent on the dollar, shipped it to Massachusetts, and sold it at face value. Then he wrote a book titled A Pickle for the Knowing Ones, claiming he was the world's greatest philosopher. Story 28. Sidney James Weinberg, born October 12, 1891, and died July 23, 1969, was a longtime leader of the Wall Street firm Goldman Sachs. He was nicknamed Mr. Wall Street by the New York Times and Director's Director by Fortune magazine. In a rags-to-riches story, he rose from a janitor's assistant, earning $3 per week, to chief executive officer. Story 29. Oprah would fit the bill. She grew up poor, was abused by her family, and ran away at 13. She received a college scholarship as a reward for winning a beauty pageant. She went on to be a television correspondent at 19, the first African American to do so in Tennessee, and later the first woman to own and produce her own show. Story 30. Sam Zeme, famously known as the Banana King. He embodies one of the most compelling rags-to-riches stories in American history. He immigrated to the United States from the Russian Empire with nothing, barely speaking English, and began his career in the fruit trade by buying overripe bananas that major companies discarded. While others saw waste, Zeme saw opportunity. He sold these bananas cheaply to underserved markets, turning a meager investment into steady profit. His success was built not on privilege or luck, but on grit, hustle, and an uncanny ability to spot value where others did not. Zeme did not stop at selling bananas. He built an empire. After founding his own company, Quimal Fruit, he expanded aggressively through the jungles of Central America, building railroads, ports, and even influencing local politics to protect his business interests. His hands-on leadership and relentless ambition eventually led to a corporate showdown with United Fruit Company, the industry giant. Against all odds, Zeme outmaneuvered them, merged the two companies, and took control, transforming from an outsider to the most powerful man in the global fruit trade. What truly sets Zeme apart is the audacity of his tactics. When the Honduran government threatened his business interests, Zeme did not lobby or negotiate. He hired mercenaries, staged a coup, and installed a puppet president more favorable to American fruit interests. This direct intervention in foreign governance blurred the lines between entrepreneur and warlord. His influence extended far beyond the marketplace and into the geopolitical fabric of Central America, making him a key figure in what would later be called banana republics. Perhaps most incredible is how Zeme eventually took control of United Fruit itself, one of the most powerful corporations in the world, by ousting the very men who once mocked him. Among them was J.P. Morgan's hand-picked board, whom Zeme considered out-of-touch elites. While Morgan saw United Fruit as a paper asset, Zeme understood it as a living, breathing operation. He stormed the boardroom, forced the old guard out, and took over the company he once competed against. In doing so, he did not just build an empire, he conquered one. Story 31. In the dusty rural stretches of Phi Province, Thailand, around 1923, a boy named Chaleo was born into a family of Chinese immigrants who scraped by selling ducks and fruit. Caleo's childhood was defined by hardship. He grew up in a small wooden house, and finishing school was a luxury beyond his family's means. By his teenage years, Chaleo was already helping his parents, hustling to earn every baht. There was a quiet spark in him, a determination to build something of his own. In the 1950s, he packed his few belongings and traveled to Bangkok, a city full of opportunity. He took any work he could find and soon discovered a niche in selling antibiotics. Chaleo learned the pharmaceutical world not from textbooks, but from experience, memorizing what customers needed, who his suppliers were, and how to move boxes of medicine across a chaotic city. By 1962, he had saved enough money to open his own company, TC Pharmaceutical. It was a modest operation at first, producing antibiotics and basic medicines. As the years passed, Chaleo noticed something about the men who bought his products. Thailand's laborers and truck drivers worked punishing hours and wanted a pick-me-up to keep them going. Inspired by popular Japanese tonics like Lepavitin D, he began experimenting with a syrupy, caffeine-charged drink of his own. In 1976, Chaleo launched Krating Daeng, or Red Bull in Thai. Sold in squat brown bottles for a few baht each, it quickly became the secret weapon of Thailand's working class. Factory workers, farmers, and taxi drivers drank it before long shifts, swearing by its energy boost. Caleo's drink was not fancy, but it was exactly what people needed. Thousands of miles away, Dietrich Mateschitz, an Austrian marketing executive, arrived in Bangkok in the early 1980s. Jet-lagged and exhausted, a local contact gave him a bottle of Krating Daeng to try. Mateschitz gulped it down, felt instantly revived, and had a vision. What if he could bring this tonic to the world? When the two men finally met, they were very different. Chaleo was a self-made entrepreneur from the backstreets of Thailand. Mateschitz was a polished European businessman who knew how to sell dreams. But they shared an instinct for opportunity. In 1984, they agreed to create Red Bull GmbH. Chaleo and his son Kalerm would own 51%. Mateschitz would hold 49%. Together, they spent 3 years reworking the formula, reducing sweetness, adding carbonation, and designing sleek silver and blue slim cans. When Red Bull launched in Austria in 1987, it was an immediate sensation. It was more than a drink. It was a symbol of energy, rebellion, and living life to the limit. Red Bull's success snowballed worldwide. It made billionaires of both partners, but Chaleo never changed. While the brand became associated with skydiving, Formula One racing, and extreme sports, Chaleo stayed out of the spotlight. He preferred quiet routines, time with family, managing his growing business interests, and remaining close to his humble beginnings. Chaleo Yuvadhia passed away in March 2012 in Bangkok, leaving a vast fortune. His family, led by his son Kalerm, continues to hold a controlling stake in Red Bull, quietly stewarding the empire he built from a simple idea in the heart of Thailand. Red Bull's current valuation is $22 billion. Story 32. Johann Jacob Astor was the first multimillionaire in the United States. When he died in 1848, He had a fortune of over $30 million, which is worth almost $1 trillion in today's money. Story 33. Chris Gardner, 100%. The man literally went from sleeping in subway station bathrooms with his son to becoming a millionaire stockbroker. No money, no connections, just raw hustle. That movie, The Pursuit of Happiness? That is his real life. Story 34. Say what you want about Eminem, but he is the definition of a rags to riches story. He grew up in a broken home, very poor in Detroit, moved between difficult neighborhoods and schools, was jumped and bullied, and barely made it through high school. He worked dead-end jobs and lived in trailers, trying to support his child before anyone gave him a second look. The rap world was not welcoming to a white artist. He had to fight to be taken seriously in a genre that initially rejected him. But his skill was undeniable. His wordplay, flow, and intensity. He did not just break into the industry, he forced his way in. He went from freestyling at open mic events to Dr. Dre hearing one of his tapes and signing him almost overnight. Now he has sold hundreds of millions of records, won numerous awards, and sits at the top of a genre he was never expected to belong to. From food stamps to Forbes lists. If that is not the ultimate rags to riches story, I do not know what is. Story 35. Arnold Schwarzenegger came from rural Austria to become the greatest bodybuilder, the highest paid Hollywood actor, and later the governor of America's richest state. Story 36. Confucius was born into poverty and eventually became the head of a nation. He was the son of a concubine and was considered lowly by birthright. He was born into extreme poverty, often starving and close to death. He was also considered very unattractive. So much so that people frequently remarked on how difficult it was to look at or be around him. It is said that people even beat him as a child because they thought he was so unattractive that he deserved it. Despite this, he was highly intelligent and persistent. He eventually rose through the entire hierarchy of his nation and died with power comparable to that of an emperor. At one point, he held the positions of Chief Minister of Justice and Acting Prime Minister. Story 37. Madonna did not graduate from college. She came to New York City with $35 and nothing else. She was sexually assaulted not long after arriving. Story 38. Napoleon, even though it is so obvious it might be cheating. Lenin was a newspaper delivery boy and debate club participant, but probably came from relatively greater means than Napoleon. She lived in a cave and was a school teacher. Story 39. Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails was a janitor at a recording studio in the late 1980s. The owner let him use the equipment after hours, where he recorded Pretty Hate Machine. The album is now certified triple platinum, and Nine Inch Nails is often regarded as one of the most influential artists of all time. Story 40. I don't know about the greatest, but Lyndon Johnson is one of the most interesting. He grew up in the poor Texas Hill Country. His father lost everything on a few bad harvests. Through a combination of hard work, vision, and a unique gift for reading people, he went all the way to the White House. Story 41. Jack Dempsey was a homeless man riding the rails who fought for food and money. He became the heavyweight champion and the biggest sports icon of his time. Story 42. Biddy Mason was a slave, sold as a baby to a Mormon who eventually brought her to California, where slavery was technically not allowed. She eventually won her freedom and worked as a midwife. She invested her wages in buying a home and land in Los Angeles before it became the city it is today. She bought the land cheaply and sold it when prices increased. She invested that money in rooming houses and commercial properties, which generated more income, and she reinvested. When she died, she was one of the city's wealthiest residents, having risen to the level of a real estate tycoon worth multiple millions when accounting for inflation. She was buried in an unmarked grave in Boyle Heights, which is now marked and recognized. Story 43. I may be biased, but I have to include my boss in the mix. Born in Cambodia and thrown into the concentration camps of the Khmer Rouge, he survived polio but lost a leg. He moved to the United States when he was 7. He started 3 bars and restaurants that are still thriving and created Screwball Whiskey. He founded an orphanage in Cambodia that he regularly checks on and contributes to our community constantly. Think what you want about the peanut butter whiskey, but that man deserves a mention here. Story 44. J.K. Rowling went from a mother surviving on government assistance to a billionaire after several publishers rejected her. Story 45. What about that South African man who started from almost nothing, just his father's emerald mine, and is now the richest man in the world, admired by millions but unable to avoid a left hook? I cannot remember his name, but he comes to mind as I sit on the toilet with severe diarrhea. These facts may be related. Story 46. Jesus was born. He was in his 30s. He invested one fish which turned into many fishes. He was killed and moved in with his father, resulting in infinite fishes. Story 47. I forget his name, but look up the story of the man who created Piggly Wiggly, the store. He made and lost multiple fortunes in his life. He went from rags to riches repeatedly. Story 48. Shahid Khan is a remarkable individual. He came to the United States with $500 at 16 years old. His first job was washing dishes for $1.20 an hour. Now he is worth $13 billion. Story 49. Masayoshi Son. Rags to riches as Korean living in Japan. Became a billionaire. Lost it all. Then did it again. If you believe it all. Story 50. I was born a poor black child. In reality, I would say Jewel Kilcher. She grew up in Alaska homesteading, living a pure survival existence. Story 51. Margaret Olivia Slocum Sage was a school teacher who married into wealth. Her husband, who held misogynistic views, died and left her with millions. She used this wealth to fund women's colleges and feminist causes. Story 52. Andrew Carnegie was an immigrant from Scotland who started shoveling coal. He grew up in poverty. He became wealthy by selling stocks and started a steel company. He became the world's first billionaire. Story 53. My aunt had a very frank realization of her degree of talents and the opportunities available to her in the area and era in which she lived. So she laser-focused on shooting the moon and marrying rich. She found a successful real estate agent through the golf club where she worked part-time and succeeded. It worked out well for my parents and the rest of her siblings because then she could buy the good cocaine for parties. Gotta give it to her. She looked at the options available to her and overcame the challenge. Respect. Story 54. Loretta Lynn, the country singer, grew up literally as a coal miner's daughter. The movie featuring Sissy Spacek is an amazing film to watch. Lynn chose Spacek to portray her and had to convince her to take the role. Spacek sang every single note in the film, personally trained and guided by Lynn. Born to a poor family in Kentucky and a married mother of 3 by the time she was 19, Loretta Lynn became one of the most legendary country music performers of all time. She had a net worth of more than $60 million when she passed away in 2022 at age 90, after battling addiction and health issues for much of her life. She was Crystal Gayle's sister and had 6 children of her own. Story 55. Not the greatest worldwide probably, but for me personally, my maternal grandfather came from nothing. There was famine in the village and not enough to eat twice. He struggled greatly and learned a lot. In the army, he was top of his class. Internationally, on a United States mission to Haiti, he resolved a conflict between our army and another country's army. He is now a multimillionaire, which is very hard to achieve with Pakistan's economy. He built an empire for all of us and continues to take care of everyone. In my eyes, he is the greatest man to ever have lived. Story 56. Robert Smalls went from being enslaved on a plantation to stealing a Confederate ship, sailing to freedom, becoming a celebrity, running for state representative, and then buying his former slave owner's plantation while allowing the slave owner's widow to remain on the property as a tenant. There is finally a movie in the works about his story. Story 57. Emmanuel Jal was born into war and genocide and became a war child. Now, he is a successful musician who donates most of his money to charity to help children in developing countries. He made a movie about returning to the village where he grew up. It is a difficult movie to watch, but it tells an incredible story about overcoming hate. He also gave a TED Talk about an aid worker who lost her life saving children like him, including saving him personally. Story 58. Keith Gill turned $50,000 into over $1 billion and counting by investing in GameStop. I will probably be banned for this comment. Story 59. Genghis Khan. Born between 1155 and 1167 and given the name Temujin, he was the eldest child of Yasuji, a Mongol chieftain of the Borjigin clan, and his wife Hoelin. When Temujin was 8, his father died, and his family was abandoned by its tribe. Reduced to near poverty, Temujin killed his older half-brother to secure his familial position. Story 60. Pretty much any athlete who grew up poor and became world-class in a popular sport. Football, known as soccer in the United States, is full of stories about very poor children making it into the top leagues and retiring very wealthy. For example, Diego Maradona grew up in a slum playing football. His parents often went hungry so they could afford to feed him. He went on to become one of the greatest players in the world and left an inheritance worth approximately $150 million. Story 61. Oprah Gail Winfrey was born poor in rural Mississippi to a soldier and an unwed teenage mother. Her grandmother raised her until she was 6. Then her mother found work, so she was sent to Milwaukee to live with her. While her mother was away in their inner-city apartment, young Oprah was repeatedly sexually abused for years. She tried running away from that nightmare and was sent to a detention home, only to be turned back when all the beds were full. Homeless at 13 or 14, she became pregnant. Her baby died very young. She then found her father and went to stay with him. She described him as very strict, but by 17, she had turned her life around. Story 62. Cristiano Ronaldo. Born to a lower-middle-class family with multiple children in Madeira, Portugal. He swept streets to earn a living to support the family and relied only on his passion for football to take him ahead. He left his family at 14 to join a team far from home and rose through with discipline and dedication to master his craft. He was noticed by a legendary manager and became one of the youngest and most expensive transfers in English Premier League history to be adorned with the number 7. Despite fame and money, his work ethic did not change. His discipline brought him many accolades across Europe and made him the highest-paid transfer at the time. Over time, he became one of the leading goal scorers of the game and is the most influential athlete on social media. His celebrations are mirrored by athletes of all sports, and his ability to win trophies even at the age of 39 shows his hunger. He is worth $1 billion and has an airport named after him, as well as museums and stadiums. Despite all this, he remains kind enough to help people whenever he can. Truly, from sweeping for rags to sweeping the streets with his extensive collection of cars. Story 63. Desi Arnaz is a good example. He came from a wealthy family but fled Cuba and lost everything by the time he arrived in America. He changed television forever and ran the biggest studio of his time. Story 64. A friend I grew up with grew up poor but was a very talented artist. He is rich and famous now. I am very happy for him. Story 65. Babe Ruth is an interesting figure. Born in 1895 in one of the poorest neighborhoods of Baltimore, Maryland, he grew up in his father's saloon, stealing alcohol and getting into constant trouble on the streets. His parents sent him to a Catholic boarding school at age 7 due to his extreme misbehavior. One of the teachers there taught him how to play baseball, and the rest is history. He went on to become arguably the greatest baseball player of all time, one of the most famous people in America during the Roaring '20s, and essentially the first professional athlete to become a full-blown pop culture celebrity. Story 66. A man in Texas during the 1940s was kicked out of the house by his father. His mother gave him $20. He tried various businesses and eventually ended up potato farming. He made a business deal with McDonald's and died a billionaire. Story 67. Arnold Schwarzenegger. Ulysses S. Grant also comes to mind. The man was so poor at one point in his life that he was pawning his possessions to buy his children's Christmas presents. Story 68. Andrew Carnegie came here as an immigrant boy. He and his family had nothing, and the rest is history. Story 69. The Sylvester Stallone story comes close, although he was not as desolate as some others in this discussion. He was a B actor barely getting by and wrote the script for Rocky in 3 days. It was inspired by Chuck Wepner's fight with Muhammad Ali. He held out for someone who would let him star in the film, even though he would have made much more if he had sold it outright. As they say, the rest is history. I am inspired by him and his journey. Story 70. Charlie Chaplin may be the person. He grew up in poverty in Victorian London and went on to become the biggest movie star in the world. I am not even sure modern audiences can comprehend how famous he was at his peak. Story 71. Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong is believed to have been born in New Orleans on August 4, 1901, but the date has been heavily debated. Armstrong himself often claimed he was born on July 4, 1900. His parents were Mary Estelle Mahan Albert and William Armstrong. Mary Albert was from Bout, Louisiana, and gave birth at home when she was about 16. Less than a year and a half later, they had a daughter, Beatrice Mama Lucy Armstrong, who Albert raised. William Armstrong abandoned the family shortly after that. Louis Armstrong was raised by his grandmother until the age of 5, when he was returned to his mother. Armstrong spent his youth in poverty in a rough neighborhood known as the Battlefield, on the southern section of Rampart Street. At the age of 6, Armstrong started attending the Fisk School for Boys, a school that accepted black children in the racially segregated school system of New Orleans. Armstrong lived with his mother and sister during this time and worked for the Karnofskys, a family of Lithuanian Jews, at their home. Armstrong helped their sons Morris and Alex collect rags and bones and deliver coal. In 1969, while recovering from heart and kidney problems at Beth Israel Hospital in New York City, Armstrong wrote a memoir called Louis Armstrong and the Jewish Family in New Orleans, Louisiana, the year of 1907, describing his time working for the Karnofsky family. Story 72. Roaring Kitty, also known as Deep Value, turned $50,000 into hundreds of millions, potentially over $1 billion now, in under 5 years. Disdain Wall Street. Story 73. J.K. Rowling, a single mother living on benefits in social housing, wrote her books in a cafe. Edit. With $1 billion in the bank, she can say whatever she wants and is entitled to her opinion. Story 74. Han Guo, the first Ming Emperor of China, was born into a peasant family. He overthrew the Yuan dynasty and founded the Ming dynasty. Story 75. For me, Genghis Khan. He was not exactly born in rags, being a son of a minor clan chieftain, but he and his family later found themselves expelled from their tribe after their father was murdered. They were in abject poverty and could easily have perished. However, a few decades later, Temujin united all Mongol tribes, crushed 2 regional superpowers of the age, the Chinese and Khwarezmian empires, created the world's largest land empire stretching from Korea to Hungary, and amassed a fortune beyond anyone's imagining. Story 76. W. Clement Stone. He went from being a poor kid in Chicago selling newspapers on the street to creating and owning a multi-billion-dollar insurance company. He read and wrote many positive mental attitude self-help books, developing a system he credited for his great success. He was a major political donor and influencer. He lived in a huge mansion on the shore of Lake Michigan, just a few miles from where I grew up. He lived to be 100 years old. Story 77. Mattress Mac. A man came to Houston as an immigrant with nothing, barely even owning the clothes on his back. Now, he gives away free mattresses to everyone who cannot afford one. Story 78. Oprah Winfrey was born into poverty in the Jim Crow South. She experienced an unstable home life and suffered abuse, including sexual assault by a family member. She had a child in her early teens as a result of these assaults, but the baby died. Today, she is a billionaire and has been one of the most influential figures in shaping taste and culture in the United States for many years. Story 79. There is a YouTube video on Wang Chuanfu, founder of the Build Your Dreams company, maker of electric vehicles. That is a rags to riches story. Story 80. Bernie Ecclestone is a controversial and fascinating figure. He grew up in poverty and went on to own Formula One, making it one of the biggest sports in the world. His dealings with business, drivers, and teams are interesting to learn about. Story 81. The founder of Domino's Pizza, an orphan, ended up building a Catholic college outside of Naples, Florida, right next to Immokalee, Florida, the poorest part of the state. It is going to be a swanky college for students connected to understanding poverty. Story 82. Isaac Newton was a man who came from nothing and later became the most influential scientist in the United Kingdom. He also became a religious leader to the founding fathers of the United States and created the first secret service on the planet. Story 83. Nikita Sergeyevich Khrushchev was born into the peasant class in old Russia when there was a royal family and rose to lead the Soviet Union. It is an incredible rags to riches story and a rise to absolute power. Story 84. Many sporting legends come to mind. One notable figure is Duncan Bannatyne. He did not come from absolute poverty but grew up in a Scottish household shared by multiple families. He joined the Navy but was dishonorably discharged, admitting fault. Leaving the Navy with nothing, he worked various part-time jobs. He bought an ice cream van for £450, expanded his business into an empire of ice cream vans, sold the business, and then built another business. He created his own health club brand and became an entrepreneur. He is now a millionaire. He is well known for being a dragon on Dragon's Den, the British equivalent of Shark Tank. After his time on the show, he sold every investment he made there. He now mainly focuses on charity work, having already made his millions. Story 85. Eminem's father left when he was young. His mother struggled with drug addiction. His brother had special needs. The family frequently moved between Missouri and Detroit. Story 86. Come and listen to a story about a man named Jed. A poor mountaineer barely kept his family fed. Then one day he was shooting at some food, and up through the ground came bubbling crude oil, that is, black gold. Story 87. Andrew Carnegie was the third son of extremely poor Irish sailors. He never had a good education. His family left Ireland for America during a famine. A few years later, he became one of the richest steamship owners in the world. Story 88. Amancio Ortega started with nothing and founded Industria de Destino Textil Sociedad Anónima, owner of Zara among many other brands, which became the biggest clothing company in the world. Story 89. Genghis Khan. His father was a clan chief, but he died early. Temujin, Genghis Khan's name before he became Khan, grew up in the wild with his mother, older brother, and a few other relatives, living off the occasional rodent they could catch. He was once made a slave. He founded the Mongol Empire, which was without a doubt the most powerful state of the time. Story 90. Percy Master P. Miller. Born into poverty in one of the worst housing projects in the world, he had nothing. His grandfather in California died and left him a modest inheritance, so he moved to California and decided to open a record store. A record store is a place where people used to buy music before the era of smartphones and digital downloads. He soon realized that it would be cheaper and easier to stock his store with merchandise if he controlled production instead of being overcharged by music distributors. So he decided to make music himself. He found a few local rappers and producers to assist him and achieved some success. Not just because the music was good, but because, unlike most rappers in history, he understood the processes behind the music industry and had direct outlets to sell his own product and keep most of the money. When major record companies approached him, he was able to tell them he didn't need them. He signed an unprecedented deal with Priority Records to partner with his label only because they could offer more promotion and distribution coverage than he had regionally. In need of more talent, he returned to New Orleans, which was not known as a major city for rap music at the time, and recruited his brothers, cousins, and childhood friends, none of whom were professional musicians, to be acts. No Limit became the #1 independent music label in the world. Because Master P was fair and conducted business with his loved ones, he did not exploit his artists as most executives did. He not only became independently wealthy but created more wealthy people as well. His success did not stop with music. He also expanded into film and clothing. He also made it to play in the National Basketball Association. Story 91. I have a name that comes to mind, but I will not say it. It will remain a secret for those who know. Story 92. I worked with a man who grew up on the mean streets and worked his way up in a business, then owned his own business within that industry. He became very wealthy, spent money extravagantly, including being generous with employees, lost everything due to a passion for racehorses, and continued to work in the same industry at a friend's similar business. He had an incredible life and was the most down-to-earth person I ever met in our industry and one of my favorite coworkers. This all spanned about 45 to 50 years. He passed away from cancer at age 70 in 2002. His greatest earning period was from the mid-1960s through the mid-1990s. He treated everyone as an equal and shared off-color jokes and stories of growing up on the streets in the 1950s and early 1960s. I miss him dearly. At his wake, the line of cars waiting to enter the funeral home parking lot stretched around the block and down the street. Once inside, not a single bad thing was said about him. He was an absolute treasure, especially in an industry known for being notoriously corrupt. Story 93. I have a close friend who is also one of my cousins and did just that. We started out the same in high school, and just last week he told me he was on track to make over $1 million this year. I am pinching pennies. I know this goes against common beliefs that rich people are bad. But there you have it. Story 94. Angelo Solomon. He was born in what is now Nigeria, enslaved by a neighboring tribe, and sold to Europeans for a horse. A few decades later, he was head of the servants of one of the richest princely houses in Europe. He spoke fluent German, English, Latin, Czech, French, and Italian. He was an excellent chess player, married a European woman in one of the most important churches of the Holy Roman Empire, was valued by the emperor as a companion, was the tutor of the crown prince, and was vice master of ceremonies of the Freemasons. Story 95. I think the story of Kurt Cobain and Chris Novoselic is pretty cool. They came from a small logging town with no future, except that they were really good at making songs. Story 96. Queen Mary of Denmark, an Australian woman, became a queen after meeting a future king in a Sydney pub during the 2000 Olympic Games. Story 97. I think a more common example is about a group of men who recorded a show in one person's home. The show eventually became popular, leading them to start a media company. After many internal issues, selling the company, and seeing it close, they have announced it is coming back. I am aware my timetable is off, as I have been out of the fandom for a while. Story 98. Amazon started in a garage and look how big it is now. If that is not a rags to riches story, then I do not know what else is. Story 99. The director of my company grew up sleeping under bridges and spending his days picking up cigarette butts for his mentally unwell mother. He put himself through engineering school, worked his way up from construction supervisor to project manager, and received an offer to start a new division within a large company. He grew that division into a powerhouse and is now going to Texas as a full partner to start a new division there. He is rich and successful beyond his wildest dreams. Story 100. Notch. I know he is a bit unpleasant, but still. He came from a family affected by divorce and substance abuse. His sister died from drugs, and his father committed suicide. He lived in his mother's basement and was essentially a typical online community moderator. He worked low-paying jobs but created his own game in his mother's basement. This game, of course, went on to become Minecraft. Now he is a billionaire and still unhappy. Story 101. Francis Ngannou is a professional mixed martial artist who competed in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. He later faced Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua in boxing matches. If I am not mistaken, he attempted to cross borders on foot multiple times to leave his country but was sent back each time and had to try again. That demonstrates an extraordinary level of determination. Story 102. Francis Ngannou's story is incredible. From the salt mines in Cameroon to international stardom, you can find pictures of him with his mother in his old home. Story 103. Not super wealthy, but my dad had a good story. Over 40 years old, fresh out of prison, on drugs, he was a Marine and biker gang type of guy, definitely rough around the edges. He moved to another state. Left us, but I'm not mad at it. It is what it is. He got clean, started painting cars, eventually bought a small auto body shop and grew it over time. I started visiting him in the summers and working at his shop when I was around 10. The shop became very successful. He ran it hard and demanded perfection. At his best, he was making well over $300,000 a year. Eventually, he sold the shop for a couple $1 million and retired. Even though he sacrificed being a father, which was a bad choice, it's life. I just thought it was kind of cool going from being 40, in prison, and on drugs to eventually becoming a multimillionaire. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.